Okay. We set up a little bit of the history on the FAA's decision to start accepting digital signatures and transactions. It originated in a joint order of the FAA and the DOT back in 2008 when they said that digital signatures are acceptable for federal purposes. They're federally acceptable to utilize those. The registry itself issued its own change bulletin in 2016 saying we will start accepting these. Within about 30 days, they issued some guidance and clarification as to what was going to be required and needed. And since that time, we've been using that. Perhaps one of the biggest issues was a lot of confusion over the distinctions between electronic and digital signatures because of the way the FAA set up their own processes. They were unable to ascertain whether or not the documents were being submitted with electronic signatures or digital signatures. And that sort of moves us to our next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Hey, Bruce, sorry to interrupt, Bruce. We just had two quick questions that I wanted to run by you and Scott. The first had to do with user accounts. The question was how they'll work. Will they continue to use escrow agents? Will lawyers, brokers, owners, lien holders, et cetera, have to get their own user account?
Well, again, this is not official, but yes, we understand that the lawyers, brokers, anyone who's doing multiple transactions or assisting on multiple transactions will need their separate account. So the folks at McAfee and Taft, the folks at AIC will have to have their separate account vetted, approved, so that they can get onto this system and help their clients close transactions. And that's in addition to their clients.
Okay.
Yeah, Ken, well, we don't have all the details and information. We anticipate it's going to be something similar to what the IR does. And today we help and assist our customers in becoming part of the IR, getting on the IR, and then we take over from there and accomplishing their transactions. So I don't know that there'll be any significant changes. It's just that there's just going to be some additional steps to get business done.
Okay. And then the other quick question had to do with when you're dealing with money that needs to be wired, and obviously then you're predicated around Federal Reserve Bank business hours versus the now 24/7, arrangement with the registry.
Well, I think that's a question that needs to be answered by the people in the finance industry as to whether or not they're going to make changes to be able to do 24/7 transactions from that aspect. Because I think that will be one limitation. When there's financing involved, we're going to be subject to their hours.
Okay, great. Thanks. Bruce, if you want to jump backward.
Okay. One of the things I was trying to explain is that there's a lot of confusion surrounding the distinction between digital signatures and electronic signatures. And I think if you refer back to when I said that, the FAA is actually an agency within the DOT. If you think of electronic signatures being the bigger set, and then digital signatures are actually a small subset within the context of electronic signatures. And if you go to the next slide, please. They're really two different things. And electronic signatures are the type of things that you do. And I think we've all done it at one point in time. We've accepted click wrap software where we agree to the terms, we just click a button and accept, or we perhaps done something where we've agreed to something using a signature that we generated with our Microsoft Office. All of those things are binding signatures. This goes back to the e-Sign Act back in 2000, which made electronic consent something that could occur and bind people to contracts. It's just that digital signatures are a little bit different from electronic signatures. It actually is a process where a significant amount of information is being captured in the PDF. There's all sorts of hidden algorithms and encryptions that are occurring that give a lot of information. Sometimes it's printed out, the key information is printed out in a summary in terms of who signed in, when they signed in, what IP address they were using, how long they looked at the document, when they actually gave their consent or signed the document, which is called the signing ceremony. All of these things are tracked and they're hidden and incorporated into the digitally signed document, the PDF that contains the digital signature. Another significant thing that's very important is the fact that once a document's signed, if there's any changes that are made to the document, it becomes invalid. So that, for instance, let's say we're dealing with an aircraft purchase agreement. If the purchase price is $1 million, everyone signs it and agrees to it, and someone changes the purchase price to $2 million, it's going to invalidate the document. Kind of a key thing is that when the FAA started their process, is one that requires that the document containing the digital signature be printed and then filed with the FAA. When that happens, all of the protections that are in that document are lost at that point in time. At the time it's printed, you basically don't know, other than if it looks like a digital signature and if it complies with some of the requirements that the FAA set forth as to how these things are supposed to look, the legibility and the information that's supposed to be incorporated. And that's on the next slide, if we can move to that, please. All of these things, are required. You can on its face see that from a printed copy, but you can't actually tell whether or not it's actually a digitally signed copy at that point in time, or whether someone used a product to electronically sign the document. But the FAA did provide some guidance and some things that they asked people to do. One of the key things is that the signatures, either have something that shows that it has the software provider seal, watermark, date and time of execution, or have an authentication key or code identifying the software provider. And this became an immediate issue in our industry at the time that rule came forth, unless people actually read that guidance that came out. Because if you put the date and time on the signature, and you then ask your escrow agent to assign or fill in the blanks and date your documents as to the actual closing date, when people, want to close the aircraft, they want to transfer liabilities for insurance reasons, for tax reasons, a number of things. The FAA came out with an opinion that it actually occurred, the date is actually the date that's on the digital signature. So one of the industry's solutions was just to eliminate the date and time from the signature page and follow their other guidance that you have the key or the code identifying the software provider, which was an optional thing. And when you do that, they were acceptable by the FAA. If you ever did have to authenticate the information, it was all going to be contained in the encrypted data that was in the original document, not the printed document that was sitting in the FAA office. Scott, I think you have some thoughts on how CARES is going to impact the use of digital signatures.
Right. Yeah. So, as Bruce said, like kind of the short summary of that is just that, the FAA is very clear that they require digital signatures, not electronic signatures. It'd be interesting when Ed provides his, information on kind of the legality of electronic signatures in the United States, whether or not that's really a realistic requirement anymore, that they be digitally executed, and whether it's really needed if we're going to be vetting accounts and setting up accounts for every owner. But that's their position. But the way their system works and the technology that they have currently, there's no way for them to really tell if a document was digitally executed versus electronically executed. So they put together that memo, which is public. If you don't have it, let us know. We can send you a copy, but of the requirements of what the signature should look like. The interesting thing is, with this new CARES program, they will be, they'll have the technology, just like you do at your office, to open up a document, and the program will tell you if it's been modified or if it was digitally executed, and all those sorts of things. So the FAA will actually have the ability to do that on any PDFs that you email in or submit. And so it will be interesting to see if we really will have to continue to require with these, comply with these more stringent digital signature requirements and really have to comply with them. Or if the system will allow and the FAA will allow parties to submit the easier, more widely accepted electronic signature format.
Great, Scott and Bruce, thank you for going over that. That was a lot to try to cover in a short period of time. So we want to transition over to Terry now and talk about what their group is, a lending group, how they handled this whole change over to digital signatures and some of the processes they've put in place to manage that process. Terry?
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, a lot of things that lenders need to, of course, consider is the risks involved in accepting digital signatures, but also then what Bruce and Scott have talked about as far as, well, what will the FAA accept and which application then would be appropriate for your bank. DocuSign certainly is a popular application that many people use. PNC does use DocuSign, but we may use or may have the ability to use other programs in the future. And your bank, again, would want to evaluate those types of things. Certainly one of the biggest things for banks is knowing, well, who holds the chattel paper. And so that's what was important to PNC with DocuSign, is that they have an e-vault. And so that e-vault then is what keeps the chattel paper, so that is considered the original. And every other copy then will have a watermark on it indicating that it is a copy. So when determining what application to use, you want to make sure that you understand how that chattel paper is going to be held. Certainly another aspect is the fraud piece of it. And, you want to make sure that your signer is truly signing that document and they haven't, say, passed that on to an assistant, or the wife is signing instead of the husband, or the husband instead of the wife. And so what we do to make sure that we are having that person that we need sign a document, we provide them with a 6-digit access code, and we must give that code to the signer verbally. This certainly can be challenging at times, especially dealing with the high net worth individuals that we work with in our industry. But it's something that, as long as you're setting those expectations up front, and the assistants or CFOs know that we need to be talking with these individuals, that we can, we haven't really had any problems as far as providing the codes and getting the signatures, and again making sure that we're not having somebody else sign who shouldn't be signing. So, it's every lender just needs to go through their vetting process, considering those risks, and making sure that they understand what it is that these software applications provide them. And that's all I've got on that slide.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Ed, do you want to jump in now and get onto the legal side of handling all these documents?
Sure. Well, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to talk about some of the legal issues associated with digital signatures. And the statutory framework that we have for digital signatures is that there's a group of state laws called the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, or UETA. This is a uniform act. The way uniform acts come about is that you get some legal scholars make a determination that we need to have some sort of law that applies across the various states on a particular topic. So they go out, they draft it, they propose it, and put it out there for all the states to consider whether they want to make that part of their law. This is the Uniform Commercial Code is a very good example of this that we're all familiar with. The UETA has been adopted in all but 3 states. Those are New York, Illinois, and Washington. So you've got a very uniform set of rules that govern how digital and electronic signatures will be treated. In addition to that, there's a federal law called the Electronic Signatures and Global National Commerce Act, which is typically called e-sign. And it covers much of the same ground as UETA does. And there's a lot of interplay between the two, and whether one is, whether the federal rules preempt the state rules. The net effect, without getting into the weeds on it, is that the rules for the acceptance and validity of electronic signatures are substantially the same in all 50 states and govern the same way in a federal format as well. So if we flip to the next slide, some of the real world questions that we'll try to address here in the questions at the end are, if you have digital signatures, is it necessary to get backup original signatures? Some of the reluctance of lenders to provide digital releases. What about documents that aren't filed at the FAA? We know what the FAA will and won't accept. Other documents that are ancillary to the filings, for example, a delivery and acceptance certificate, the purchase agreement. How are they addressed? How do we address notary issues? And then I think what is a real issue is the use of standalone signature pages and packets that we've all gotten very accustomed to in a lot of transactions.
Ed, we have one quick question, if I could.
Sure.
The question is, are electronic notary services like Notarized.com accepted federally or in all states?
I don't know the answer to that. It really, that issue is not really addressed in either of the uniform statutes. I think that's going to be, a topic for interpretation by the courts. But I suspect that they will find a way to legitimize the use of electronic notaries, because it is becoming more of an accepted practice and a necessity given the world that we're living in right now.
Thank you.
So turning the page over to legal opinions, this is an area of interest, I think, for banks that are requiring opinions on transactions, on their loan transactions. Usually it comes either from in-house counsel of the borrower or from outside counsel to the borrower. And before digital signatures, there was always this group called the Tribar Opinion Committee, and that is a group of various bar associations around the country that have all gotten together to kind of come up with a playbook and ground rules for what legal opinions should include, can't include. What are the rules for opinions? What assumptions can lawyers make? What assumptions are automatically in an opinion, even if it's not stated? The Tribar Opinion Committee recently came out with a statement on the treatment of UETA and e-sign. And the bottom line is they said that electronic signatures on deal documents are valid. So if you're doing an opinion based on an electronically signed document, you can treat that signature as valid. And docs signed with electronic signatures have legal effect. So basically what they're saying is that from an opinion perspective, an e-signed document is every bit as valid as a manually signed document. E-signed contracts, the Tribar opinion says that if you're looking at one and you see that the document is signed electronically, the lawyer can make the assumption that there's an implied agreement by the parties that electronic signatures on the documents are valid. So you don't have to check to see if there's been any specific opting in to an electronic signature regimen. Going to the next page, making one of the opinions that lawyers are typically asked to make is the document duly executed? And that can, and for the purposes of this, e-signatures would include emails, PDFs, faxes, and what we're talking about more today, DocuSign, Adobe, and other third-party provider basis for e-signatures. So the duly executed opinion can be based on the assumption that it's based on the party's conduct. So if the parties have electronically signed, lawyers can assume that that's what they intended to do. The contract doesn't need to explicitly state that it authorizes e-signatures, although that could be a better practice for banks and other parties to transactions to include in their contract language going forward. But the opinion giver really should review the document, and as should the parties to the document, to make sure that the contract doesn't explicitly exclude or prohibit e-signatures. So you can, unless you see something to the contrary, you can assume that an e-signed contract is duly executed. The general rule is that an opinion may be based on the assumption that the signatures are valid, and that assumption is the same for a manually signed or an e-signed document. So again, from a legal opinion perspective, it doesn't make any difference. The assumptions are the same for manual signed documents or for electronically signed documents. Moving to the next page, enforcement. I've broken this down into internal issues, which the internal issues are kind of the things that we all deal with, the normative behavior that we engage in, and we've all gotten so accustomed to in closing transactions through the law firms and title companies in Oklahoma City. And then the external issues, which are, how would a court look at it? How would a third party look at what we've just done? We've already talked about what the FAA will accept. The bottom line is that digital signatures are okay. So the registry is going to accept them. There's still some open questions about digital versus electronic, and a lot of things that are going to be going to shake out during the CARES Act implementation. But for now, we know that digital signatures are okay. Our normative behavior has, in a lot of transactions, what we see is signature packets being sent out. And rather than sending out the entire document to be executed, the lender or lender's counsel will put together a packet of all the signature pages. It makes it easier for the signer to just go through a packet, sign every page. They don't have to flip through 30 pages of a loan document to get to where they need to be to sign. Makes things a lot easier. And then what we normally do is we take that signature page, we have, Scott's firm or Bruce's firm, attach it to the body of the document, and that's what gets submitted to the FAA. We authorize them during the closing to date it. There may be some blanks in the document at that point that need to be completed, or serial numbers that need to be corrected. We've all gotten used to doing that. And it makes it easier to do deals. So that's the way it is. So from a best practices perspective, I think it's a good idea to address the acceptance and validity of e-signatures in the documents. We should have some methodology for validating the completion of the documents in Oklahoma City, and some sort of methodology for the exchange of final documents post-closing. Is there an opportunity to comment or object? When do we know that the documents that are filed have actually been the ones that have been agreed to. And a lot of this behavior takes place during the closing call, but it's all verbal at that point. And do we need to formalize that? Flipping to the next page on enforcement from an external perspective, there's not a lot of law out there on how courts interpret e-signed documents. And one area that I find to be potentially very troubling is this whole concept of signature pages that are being affixed to the body of a document. How is the court going to view that? Are they going to just accept the fact that everybody agreed that that's what they were going to do? How are they going to view dating and completion and correction of documents? We've left it open for courts to interpret, and there's some potential pitfalls there. Question of forgeries. I can't figure out how somebody could forge an e-document, but I'm sure there are hackers out there that are far more technically proficient than I that will figure out a way to do it. Terry mentioned that they send a 6-digit verification code. I think that's a great idea. We all see that in other aspects of our life. You order something online, before it gets accepted, you get a text message that says, "Hey, is this really you?" That's something that we should all think about to cut down on the possibility of forgeries, or as Terry mentioned before, the administrative assistant is signing for the executive, or the wife or husband is signing for the other person. So it's something we should think about. International deals, we all know what the law is in the US. These signatures are pretty readily accepted. On an international deal, I don't know that we can just assume that. All the more reason to put some language in your documents to address that situation. Going to the next page, in doing some research on this, one of my colleagues at the firm sent me a copy of the Mergers and Acquisitions Committee of the American Bar Association. Has actually come up with a set of rules and guidelines for acceptance of digital signatures. And because we're running a little short on time, I won't go through what those are, but I would propose that maybe the aviation community, and particularly this branch of the aviation community being the finance side of things, ought to explore, coming up with a set of rules that you could basically opt into with your document that says, we are acknowledging that these rules are governing the execution and filing and enforcement of documents going forward. So we take some of that potential for interpretation that we may not like out of the process. We'll flip to the next page, and I think we want to just kind of open this up in terms of what people think about changes to normative behavior, and situations where one party accepts digital signatures and the other one doesn't. So.
Great, thanks, Ed. As you said, we are sort of coming up to the end of our time. So I want to thank Terry, Ed, Scott, and Bruce. There was a lot to cover. Certainly, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to email them in to any of the participants, or even to Karen or Tracy at NAFA, and we can certainly get back to them. So Tracy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for attending and participating. There's a lot of information here. So as Lee said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me, but I don't really probably know some of these panelists would be a better option for reaching out to. So thank you for participating. Don't forget to register for the upcoming welcome reception in Vegas and our annual conference next year in Napa Valley. And both of the information about both of those events is on our website. Thank you.